David Rankin and Kristen Webster from Panuku to talk about the Climate Change and Sustainability Program for Panuku. And just a reminder, if you are typing in the Skype, that Suad will keep an eye on that and keep your mics off when you are not speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This discussion, I think, came about because of a conversation you had with our Chair a while ago. Adrian's an apology this morning. She'd hoped to be here, but it wasn't possible. Kristen, who heads our corporate responsibility function, is going to give you a brief presentation on our work program, and we're happy to take questions and comment after that. I guess the key thought I would open with is one that I introduced yesterday in the strategy session that we had with the other CCOs and councillors, which is that the major impact over time from Panuku on climate change sustainability agenda generally is our core regeneration function, where if you think about it, we're going to current centres that are almost all on the rail line or on very good bus services. We're going to sites that are unused or poorly used at the moment. We're often decontaminating them. We're building a new structure on them to modern environmental standards. We're in the process revitalising those older centres with people who will be much less reliant on a private motor vehicle usage. So that's kind of the big theme, and then there are other things we're doing with the property portfolio we manage and our own corporate activities, which Kristen will give you the flavour of.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks for the opportunity to come along today and give you a little bit of an update on our work program. So essentially at Panuku we recognise the importance of taking climate action, and there's a broad context that informs this work that most of you will be familiar with, which I won't run through. Next slide. So for us, we have 2 SOI targets this year that relate to climate change. Firstly, we'll be piloting the use of life cycle assessment to measure the carbon impact of our new developments. And secondly, we'll be ensuring that our master planning processes we'll be undertaking consider future climate impacts, risk, vulnerabilities and responses. And we're a member of the Climate Leaders Coalition, as is Auckland Council and a number of other members of the council family, so we have some commitments that we're working on in relation to that. So in delivering our work, we're also very aware that while we have there's also some council and CCO targets across the family that we're also helping to deliver on. So there's some ambitious emissions targets that council has. There's some waste management targets, and then Watercare also has its own water targets, so we're working towards those as well. So we've given a bit of thought to, essentially what are we trying to do at Panuku, what's the big story, and we've identified these 2 objectives that really sum up our approach. So the communities that we're delivering in our neighbourhoods, we're designing and developing them to be low carbon and climate resilient. And also we're trying to lead by example through reducing the climate impact across our own operations and also in our asset management function. And in doing so, we're recognising that we really need to be doing both mitigation and adaptation, and our response is critical to be looking at both of those aspects. So this little graph here will be familiar to some, but this is Auckland's carbon footprint. These are the emissions from the Auckland region. So the detail in that is that transport and energy are 2 really big contributors to our carbon footprint. And so as David touched on, urban regeneration in town centre locations and delivery of low carbon buildings can have a significant impact on both of those 2 areas. So we feel that Panuku is a part of the puzzle to reducing our emissions. Next slide. And so this is just, we've given some thought to the work that we do, and we really strongly recognise that there are many co-benefits to the work that we do in urban regeneration, and we have the ability to advance a number of agendas which link in with this, and notably we feel it plays a role in our response and recovery from the impacts of COVID-19, and also our response to the climate emergency. And so, we've thought about what does success look like for us in delivering our urban regeneration function, with a climate lens placed on it. So, there's low carbon design and delivery of development, there's future-proofing the development for a changing climate, but then it's also what David touched on about, not needing to use your car as much. So it's low carbon lifestyles, it's enabling people to live, work and play in a location, in the same location. The town centres, they're attractive, they're easy to get around, they're promoting and facilitating, sustainable use of sustainable transport modes. And ideally, we're we're connecting with our communities, we're engaging with them, and they're understanding climate issues and the role that that plays in their life. So just to, I guess, touch on some examples that we feel articulates, how do we do climate action at Panuku? What are some examples of mitigation and adaptation? So the Wynyard Quarter is I guess, an earlier example that came from Waterfront Auckland days. And so in this location, we set some pretty clear standards for our development partners back in 2013. And there was a use of rating tools. So down there we have a minimum of 7 home star for all the developments. A lot of those dwellings down there have achieved an 8-star rating. And we also have 5 green star for the commercial developments. And something that's and I was involved with setting those standards back in 2013, and I had an interesting meeting about a year ago with one of the developers down there, and it was quite heartening that he made some comment that at the time he kind of thought we were, I think he said, shooting for moonbeams, which I thought was kind of funny. So there was this desire that we wanted to set some really good standards. They weren't sure that that was really going to be deliverable or economically viable or whatever. There was some hesitancy, and then time has shown that actually that was the right thing to do. The developments have sold well. They look great. They're nice places, and the proof is kind of in the pudding. So I guess with that location, we're looking to keep raising our standards, and leverage off the success that we've achieved down there and the learnings that we've had in Wynyard Quarter. Another one that we're working on at the moment with our colleagues at AT is some sustainable transport upgrades in Henderson. So, this is really just talking to the importance of having the infrastructure there that promotes and facilitates sustainable transport use. So there's walking and cycling upgrade. There's about 7 kilometres of network that's going in there, through the Panuku, Oratia and Ratanui linkages. So that's a great opportunity for us to really scale up the infrastructure in that area and see some real benefits. Another one that is also just I guess a lot of our work that we do with partners, we're not just in our own little vacuum operating away. So Te Ara Awataha in Northcote, that some of you will be familiar with, is another really fantastic example. So that's being delivered by Panuku in collaboration with Kāinga Ora, working alongside Healthy Waters, Kaipātiki Local Board and Mana Whenua. And so just, fantastic example of, green infrastructure, daylighting a stream, big network, 1.5 kilometre network of linkages of open space with walking, cycling, linking in with local schools. There's an outdoor classroom that's being delivered there, providing, climate resilience, and that it's allowing for those waterways to be able to flood naturally if need be, and just creating some lovely green linkages and riparian planting and all the rest of it. So that's another fantastic one. One more example. And then the bottom one there is master planning work that we're doing at the moment in Onehunga Wharf. So this one, we've had some technical work done which is underpinning this, which is really looking at what are the latest projections for sea level rise, what are the time frames, and then what is that going to look like on the ground in these locations, and then how do we develop these places to be resilient over time and to change and evolve over time. Sea level rise is not a static process, obviously, so we don't want to be in the business of putting massive walls up for 100 years in time that aren't needed now. So it's looking at what do we need for 20 years, 50 years, 75 years, and designing those edges, those naturalised edges to accommodate change. So that's another one that's shaping up well, and just demonstrating that approach of resilient planning. And so in terms of what's next for us, how do we keep ratcheting up and furthering our climate response? What are the next issues for us? So we've really taken a broad scan across our organisation to look at the different parts of our business and what's really, really important for us. So I'm not going to talk to all of these, but just a couple that I really want to pick out. We've done some work around standards before with energy efficiency, water efficiency, but we're very conscious that the next, level, or the most important thing, is really focusing on carbon. And so what we're looking at doing this year is piloting the use of life cycle analysis. So that's looking at the carbon impacts across the whole life cycle of a development, design, construction, delivery, end of life, to really understand the carbon impacts of the projects that we're delivering. So that's quite an exciting one for us, and we really look forward to seeing how that one pans out for us. Another one is sustainable procurement. So I think this was already something that we'd started. We've had a couple of projects that we've done some work in this space, and we've been discussing with our colleagues at AT who have done some really fantastic work in this space also. But the whole COVID scenario and the fiscally constrained environment we now find ourselves in really just hammers this home even further, that if our budgets are reduced, we're spending less money. We really need to make that dollar go as far as it can, and reap kind of multiple benefits from our spend. So I think for sustainable procurement, we're looking to council. Council's obviously got the sustainable procurement objectives that it's delivered, I think, signed off earlier this year, and we're looking to develop and utilise those. So we had an example earlier this year that I guess we piloted in Henderson, where we put a 25% supplier diversity part into the tender, and it's been fantastic. So we worked with TSI to identify some Māori and Pacifica businesses that could be involved in the delivery of the construction, and that's panning out well. So that work with TSI has been great. And the contractor, the lead contractor on that, has been really happy with how that's played out with the subcontractors. And another aspect to that one is we had a 90% construction and demolition waste target put into that tender as well, that the contractor had to deliver on as well. So just those two different aspects of under the banner of sustainable procurement, but dealing with socially sustainable and environmentally sustainable as well. So that's something we want to keep pushing across the business. And just touching on it, so I've already talked about life cycle analysis, but I just want to demonstrate that I think our approach at Panuku is that we want to have really, really good minimum standards. So we can't do the best everywhere, but we want to have some good minimum standards in terms of delivery, so above building code for sure. And then we want to do some pilots of exemplary projects to really showcase what best practice looks like in some particular developments. So the use of life cycle analysis is one that we've got coming up. We've also got a zero carbon residential development, which is in the pipeline for Henderson, which is being done through the C40 collaboration, which is also really exciting. And not strictly in relation to sustainability, but it falls under my team's remit of corporate responsibility. We're looking at accessible design standards. We've got some standards that we've worked to develop with our colleagues at ADO, and dealing with the disability. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the terminology. There's a panel, a universal design panel, I think it's called, that we've dealt with via our colleagues at ADO. And we're looking for a development to pilot those on this year. So that's just another one that we're looking to test. And just a couple of slides to finish up with. So another part is obviously looking at reducing our corporate emissions and leading by example. So just a couple of little highlights from recent times. We've achieved Toitu EnviroCare carbon reduced certification, so we've had our carbon footprint done and we have a management plan to reduce our emissions. We've also achieved a 5-star neighbours rating for the energy use in our corporate office. Next slide. And just some, I guess, awareness raising and behaviour change work around the office. So we've got some e-bikes, courtesy of council fleet, that we've been training up staff to use, and have been encouraging them to use those for work trips, and they've been pretty successful. We were also the proud winners in our category this year of the Aotearoa Bike Challenge, so that was for all our keen staff bike commuters. And we've also done some monitoring of our waste in our office, and in the last year reduced that by 33% through some behaviour change and promotion and good bin usage. Yeah. And that's all for me, so thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you both, and I think this is exactly why Adrian and I spoke, and she was pretty excited about ensuring that we all knew the great work that was going on. I think also you've really, you've been doing a lot of this stuff for a long time, but I think also on the back of Te Taraki a Tāwhiri, really showing that you can reduce your emissions as an organisation, so your buildings and your fleet and things like that, but also the effect on Auckland, which is the two-pronged approach we need to be bringing to that as an organisation, how we affect change across our communities, but also within back on ourselves as well. So thank you both, and thank you to the teams for the work that's been done. First question is from Councillor Cooper.
Good, thank you, and thank you to everyone at Panuku for the work that you do. It is great work, and I think we were much more involved previously in the work in Henderson, but not so much now. It would be great to see that racing ahead. My question is, and I did actually put it to David yesterday in the sidebar in our workshop, but he may not have seen it. And I mean, I absolutely support some sort of sustainable rating on houses for heating and cooling, but some recent Auckland University research that's only come out in the last few days, independent research about casting some doubt on the Homestar ratings. And look, I know that you guys and Taonga Ora have invested a lot in this, and it would be hard to be pulled back from, but I'm really hoping that you're looking at that, because it's basically saying that there's consistently too hot and too cold in the houses, and that it isn't delivering what it was meant to deliver. And there's a whole lot of issues around that if we are, supporting that and it isn't delivering. So I just guess you may not have had time to look at that, but I would really like some sort of feedback on that just quickly now. But I think we need to know that if we are, as a council, supporting a rating that now may have some doubt cast on it.
Sure, yes, happy to talk to that, Councillor Cooper. Firstly, I haven't seen that research that's hot off the press, so I'd love to have a look at it and see exactly what it says. However, I guess Homestar, it has a range of levels. Obviously, it goes up to 10. We're using 6 across our wider portfolio, and 7 is the minimum.
Sorry, it was 6. 6 was what they
okay, sure. So I'm aware that 6 is not wildly above building code. It is definitely a step up, and we do need to make sure that, and it's something that, particularly with climate change, so I think something that's always been an area of interest of mine is that sometimes we've had this message for a long time about New Zealand homes being cold and damp, and I think we're getting a bit of traction in that now, that people are going, oh, we need lots of insulation and we need all of this stuff. But if the houses aren't designed well, then I agree, they can be. I live in an old house. I've been in modern houses and gone, crikey, this is really hot and not very nice. So I'm quite concerned about climate change going forward, that we're not having an overheating problem from this lowest common denominator issue of New Zealand houses being cold. So on the roundabout way that I'm trying to get to that is that we have a development that we're currently monitoring for temperature and humidity, because I personally want to make sure that because there isn't, I'm interested to see the study, but there actually hasn't been a lot of research around how good some of these, performance of some of these houses are. So we're actually doing a year-long study at the moment to look at not just summer temperatures, but also winter. And so I think we should have some good data ourselves to kind of satisfy ourselves whether, and if there are issues, absolutely we'll be looking at tweaking our approach. I think the issue in the New Zealand market is there aren't a whole, there really aren't a whole lot of other tools to use. So, I think we need to, it would be an approach of potentially tweaking the tool that we're already using rather than abandoning it for the use of another one, because I'm not aware of another one that we could actually use. And the difficulty for us is that we can't really be setting, we've looked in the past, we've done a lot of thinking about, do we have our own bespoke standards? But then that drags us into the sphere of running around with clipboards and how do we ensure the quality control and that these standards are being met. And it's quite a burden in terms of us actually being able to, I guess, audit or whatever. So an off-the-shelf rating tool is really best for us, but I completely agree that we want to make sure that it's delivering the outcomes that we would want it to.
Thank you. And that was winter and summer. Yeah, just saying it was winter and summer.
Yeah.
But also did say that there are some good off-the-shelf standards as well. So it'd be really good if you could have a look at that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. So it was Auckland University, was it?
Yes, we'll send.
Okay.
I can get the link there and send it to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Kristen. I heard the same news the other day, but look, it's a peer review of a paper. We'll have a look at it. I was intrigued. Your focus here is on climate change, and we have now a confluence, a junction of climate change and COVID. And you referred to the COVID scenario was your words, and I was intrigued because I'm wanting that inquiry of what that actually means. And my question to you and David is where are you up to on your inquiry into this confluence of climate and response to climate, and now it's adjoined by COVID? And you mentioned this scenario. I'm not sure whether there is a scenario. If I reflect on 6 months ago, I heard that we would recover from this June in 2021. That's now being updated to 5 to 6 years out, and an economist just said it's a 30-year reset of just earlier this week. So how this links to climate, and I'll be asking the same question of the Chief Sustainability Officer later on, is how do we now read our response to climate where it is overlaid with a response to COVID, which is actually changing a whole lot of behaviour patterns, living patterns, learning patterns, and a lot of your work, which is good climate responses also, is having us focus here, and that might have to change. How are we informing ourselves? How are you as an organisation, your board and management, entering into the inquiry? Are you doing it alone? Are you doing it with the Balance of Council? Are you doing it with externals? Where are you going? Because I sure as hell don't know where we are going.
I don't know that we can add a lot, Councillor. I mean, I think we all sense that impact of COVID and the way it's changing people to think and behave. I don't think any of us knows how that will play out fully. In all reality, people will probably resume some of their previous behaviours to some extent, and there'll be a residual permanent element. We're already seeing trends like, on the whole, less commuting to the office, a lot more reliance on buying product over the net, that whole trend continuing. there may be issues, as Shane was alluding to yesterday, in getting people to be fully confident again in public transport, but how are we going to cope with peak public transport demand if people have to be more distance, you know, in a bus, for example? So there are a lot of things that we don't know. We do sense that what is probably going to be ongoing is people's interest in being involved more in their local centres and moving around locally a lot more. So we're seeing it as likely to be an affirmation of the role that town centres play. I know in the centre I live closest to, you know, it's just very obviously visible that more people are socialising and visiting their local centre rather than going to the places they were before. So I think there's an active debate going on between the executive and the board, all of us inside the council group, and I'm talking all the time with significant property investors who are all asking the same question, really. How much of this change will be permanent? Are we going to be left with a whole lot of office space in centres that doesn't have a viable use anymore as an office and will have to be repurposed? I mean, there are a lot of questions on the horizon, potentially. Do you want to add to that, Kristen?
Only just, I mean, when I said the scenario, that was just very broad terminology. I guess it's just, it highlights some issues around, you know, there's been a disruption, obviously, and the disruption is an opportunity for people to, you know, change their behaviours and things like that. And it was quite interesting reflecting. So as I mentioned, we had our carbon reduced certification done, and we have a management plan to do that. And then I was skimming through the other day some of the actions that we were going to be taking in our office, and some of it was, you know, greater increase in remote working and use of video conferencing facilities. And it was like, oh, tick, that's happened, you know. And so that's kind of happened as a result of this disruption. And I'm not, regardless if COVID went away tomorrow, I can't imagine that we will completely go back to everything being face to face, you know. So that's kind of interesting in terms of, you know, that's one impact on our carbon footprint right there. Not as much staff travel, not as much energy use in the office, but it, you know, it just raises issues. And as David touched on, it hammers home the importance of neighbourhood. I mean, in lockdown, everybody cared about, you know, where they lived and what was on their doorstep, because that was all they had access to. And so I think, you know, there'll be people that it's made a bit of a shift in their mind about the kind of life they want to live, where they might want to live, what things are really important to them in their local vicinity. And so it raises more questions than answers, I think, but it's just all stuff that's swirling around that we need to be mindful of when we're thinking about the work that we do. Yeah.
And I think, Chair, look, I'll just leave this here because it's a much bigger conversation, but your last response there, Kristen, is the critical one. It raises more questions. But in my view is, unless we actually enter the inquiry and ask the questions, we rely on observations. And, you know, like, oh, we may need less public transport, or we might be working here rather than there. They're all sort of assumptions based on observations and not based on capturing the evidence to date and entering that inquiry and doing it collectively. I mean, it's great, David, that you're saying that the board is starting to think about that, but the board of every CCO and every ELT member needs to be thinking about that, and every person in governance needs to be thinking about that, and we need to come together and think about it. And that is an enormous challenge. It is directly related to climate change.
Cool. Thank you very much, Councillor Darby. Councillor Casey, we have 4 other speakers, so we just might want to keep it tight if we can. Thank you.
Yeah, David, I should have heard this presentation before I addressed the questions I did yesterday about Key Road and Mount Eden stations. I've just been looking at your charter, the Panuku Corporate Responsibility Framework, and I'm specifically interested in hearing a bit more about accessibility, So it's that you say in their practice, Panuku will ensure that all public realm projects are designed to be inclusive and accessible. That's fantastic. Private realm or mixed, mixture?
Yeah, I'll talk to that. So I guess public, non-residential, so commercial buildings, public buildings, they're all covered by building code requirements to consider access needs. Public realm as well somewhat, and my understanding is that we deliver great practice in that space. The missing link though is residential property, so there's no requirements in the building code for accessibility to be considered, and there's an absolutely woeful mismatch between supply and demand for those types of housing. So Panuka, I guess, it was identified in that document, which is a few years old now, so it's been one of those things, it's been one of those things that we kind of, it's been on our list of things to delve into. Anyway, so it's an opportunity for us to really, I think our pipeline is around 11,000 houses over the next decade, or not houses, wrong terminology, residential units. A lot of those will be apartments. There's a real opportunity for us to.
And Kristen recently produced a report for our board that was sort of a way forward of how we gradually start to pilot more, a certain type of approach when we have got development agreements that relate to apartments, another type where it's terrace product, which is a lot more difficult to adapt for accessibility. So we're sort of on that journey, from, I guess, complete lack of awareness and doing really nothing to starting to look at it and do something.
Happy to share the board report.
I'd like. I was just going to ask.
So you can see what the standards are that we're talking about. So the initial phase is that we've basically developed some standards that we'd like to roll out more broadly, and eventually we'd like to get to the point where we would have minimum percentage requirements for each development. But the first stage is that we're going to pilot those on a development or two and just see how it plays out in practicalities, and then look to extend that. And so what we've done with that project is we've worked with the Green Building Council. There was an existing credit within the Homestar tool that looked at inclusive design, and it was very underutilised, hence in part the lack of provision of housing across Auckland. So we've worked with them to kind of tweak that a little bit, so that'll be our mechanism rather than having multiple standards that we're slapping on a development partners that like you need to use this credit within the tool. So it's an easy way for us to implement it.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Member Wilcox, you've written questions in here, but are you able to access your mic? Did you want to ask them yourself?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So my first question, I've got three questions here. How's Panuku applying water conservation and recycling within its program? And the second one is Panuku cognizant of any problems from development that could occur below the 1.5 metre above mean high water springs? And the third one is, does Panuku actively promote electrical vehicle charging ports in its development projects?
So the first was, how is Panuku applying water conservation and recycling within its developments? And next was around the mid-high water.
Okay, we'll do the first one first. Sorry, I've turned my mic on. First one first. So, water conservation. So within Homestar, there is a credit around water conservation, and that's a mandatory credit that we use. So all the developments that we deliver have water efficiency features within them, and the same for the Green Star developments that we deliver as well, the commercial developments. There isn't a requirement for recycling, so if you're talking about rainwater collection for flushing toilets or whatever, there isn't a mandatory requirement around that. It's something that would be encouraged but not mandated. And the next one was around, are we delivering anything below 1.5 mean high water spring?
Yeah, and maybe it's something on the Onehunga example you had there. That's
yeah. I mean, the only two coastal sites we have is Wynyard Quarter and Onehunga Wharf. I don't think that we would be delivering anything under that threshold.
No, and we're paying particular attention to climate change. Sorry. And we're paying particular attention to climate change issues in the master planning going on for both those, as Kristen said, Wynyard and Onehunga, you'll see when they come here.
And
Sorry, I can't remember the exact numbers above, yeah.
And the last one was, does Panuku actively promote or include electric vehicle recharging in its redevelopment projects?
Once again, it's definitely promoted and encouraged, but not mandated at this point in time. Yeah.
Well, I guess when you are working in such a significant, place around our town centres, are you thinking of mandating or including, because you are looking at cycling and reduced numbers of car parks needed and things like that, but, surely installing that electric charging or planning for it, considering we need to dramatically increase our stock of fleet,
Agreed, and we've had some delivery. There's some that's going into the Takapuna car park that's being delivered. I forget the number of charges, but there are some going in. There've also been some in Wynyard Quarter as well. I'd need to investigate further to ascertain quite how many we've got and where they've got them. And there'll be some going in Henderson as well, for sure. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. We could probably get that information, Glenn, after the meeting. That'd be cool. Thank you. Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Kristen and David, for the presentation, which I think was really helpful. My question's a specific one. How are you applying the C40 zero carbon residential development standards to your developments? And as part of that, are you doing anything in relation to either passive solar energy design, which seems to have disappeared off the radar, and the question of active solar panel power generation on those developments?
So in terms of the C40 zero carbon, so we have a development site that we put forward for the Reinventing Cities competition in Henderson. That one is still going through due diligence at the moment, so there's no building that's commenced or anything on that, but there is a design for that site to be delivered as a zero carbon development. In terms of rolling that out more broadly, it's not something that we're mandating at this stage. As I touched on, our approach is more that we have some good minimum standards, and then we would like to see some exemplars. Obviously, the C40 Henderson one would be one of those. It would be great to see another one at some point as well, but they're expensive, and we have a number of, outcomes that we're trying to achieve in our developments, and so we can't really at this point in time, particularly with the financial situation that the world and certainly Auckland is in, we can't, we've got the desire for everything to be very, very low carbon, but we can't dump all our other objectives in favour of sustainability. Otherwise, we'd spend all our money on that, if you know what I mean. So I guess that's the difficulty that we're in. These developments are expensive, and they come, at significant costs, which then means that affects the sale price that we can achieve. So it's a balance. In terms of,
to give you an example of that, and this is. If you think about what we talked about yesterday, which was the emphasis on affordable housing, we are literally heading to a debate, and I've talked about the St George's Lane site in Papatoetoe, which we are targeting as a very, very much an affordable development. We're into a debate about literally us paying for the Homestar rating process to try and that's the level of sensitivity there is when you start engaging with developers about costs. We've had exactly the same debate out at Katuitui at Barraclough Place in Manukau. This is what it gets down to. So when you get to things like solar panels and so forth, you start to get pretty quickly into debate about who's paying for it.
sorry, I'll get you to come back to also whether there's any consideration of passive solar energy, but maybe it would be helpful for us to see what sort of cost-benefit analysis is done in terms of those, the C40 standards for zero carbon. I know there'll be a cost. Equally know that cost will probably be recovered over time, but that creates some complications. But just to bring a reality check on us, I mean, obviously, we want affordable on one hand, and we want zero carbon on the other, and there's a conflict between the two objectives. But I'd really like to know what the trade-off points are on that, what the costs are, for doing X, Y, Z. This would add ABC costs, and the cost-benefit ratio would be, because I think we need to work through that. Obviously, we want you to, have everything, and that just doesn't work. But and yesterday, but where those trade-off points are, because that will give us a bit of a sense too of what we can expect for residential development in other areas. What we're expecting of the wider public. At some point, probably it will be mandated, and therefore you won't have to do the cost-benefit analysis because you just have to do it. But right now, obviously, you've got to let us know what those trade-off points are. But just on passive solar energy, is anybody talking about that these days? I did it years ago when I was Minister of Housing in the 80s, and it worked really well in some of the places in Mount Roskill that I've gone back to, and 30 years later they've got the warmest houses in town.
So you're just meaning designing well to get good solar, solar
Designing
orientation.
so that it's north facing, big windows in the north, concrete pavers that absorb the heat during the day and let it out at night, all of those sort of techniques.
Yep, I know that Homestar considers things like orientation for passive solar gain and things like that. So it is, because I agree, that's half the battle, is putting the house in the right place on the site and pointing it in the right direction and having the windows in the right place. So it's some pretty basic stuff, but you'd be amazed how many architects can't manage to do it. So, but yeah, Homestar does consider those aspects. So.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Chair. I guess my question's a bit more of a general one. Thinking a lot about the CCO review as I do, and about I think Panuku here in this presentation, you've correctly pointed out that you have a massive part to play in climate change in terms of redeveloping town centres in the public realm. So my question is, we're wanting to encourage people to work locally and work in their local centres more. Does Panuku have a strong relationship with ATEED towards economic development in what they do?
Yes, and over time we've strengthened that dialogue. Obviously, ATEED has limited resources as well. But I guess, to me, that goes back to a central theme that councillors would have heard me on before, which is, and we can use the waterfront as an example because it's and Britomart are probably our most advanced urban regeneration projects. If we want people to work more locally and more businesses to be happy setting themselves up, renting premises locally, if we want more people to live in and around centres, we have to be, coldly aware of the state of a lot of those centres today, and the fact they don't offer. They're typically pretty tired and run down. They don't have a lot of good quality amenity. I was out the other week in Panuka, Avondale, Northcote, I mentioned yesterday. You go out there and you think, if the council's strategy, this is why regeneration is so important, if the strategy that we're committed to, and it is the strategy we're committed to, is trying to get 2/3 of growth in the current urban form, and our whole planning framework is based on getting more people to live in and around centres on the rail line, they have to be nice environments. They have to be the sort of place where employers will go, yeah, my staff would like to work here because it's a nice little, it's like the waterfront. It isn't just the fact the water's there, it's the fact that we've created great laneways, streets are designed for pedestrians, nice little squares, playground, little playgrounds, all the things that you can see there. Or you look at Britomart, you go out there on a sunny day and look at all the people on that, you know, Takatai Square, which is just a bit of green in the middle of the city. So, you know, if we're serious over time about lots, and you know, Northcote, we're talking about quadruple the number of people living like in the immediate vicinity. Kaingaroa is going gangbusters now. We're looking to put in easily 700 housing units over time. Well, you know, go and look at the built form there now in the public amenity and go, would I like to have an apartment here as this is? So it's central to the regeneration approach that we've got to, over time, repurpose these centres so that they can do for the next 60 years what they were originally, which is be relevant local centres that people want to go to, and that what people want and expect now is different than it was, you know, in 1960 when Northcote was built. So I mean, that was behind, you know, the whole debate we've had about reinvestment. We've got to put money back into these areas if we're expecting a lot more people to live in them, because developers aren't going to put in nice public squares and playgrounds and fund laneways, you know, that unless it directly benefits their bit of the property.
Thank you.
Well, true indeed. Thank you very much.
Cool. And last question, Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tēnā kouroa. Thank you for the presentation, and it's really fabulous to see this work program, and there's a lot of nuggets of gold in there. My pātai is related also to the CCO review and reflecting on that, and that it found that the whole idea of the council whānau, when we talk about it, is rather illusionary. And but I just wondered, what is the cross-council practice underway in terms of collaborating and ensuring that this best practice is embedded right across the council family? And can I just sort of hear a quick example of that working together so that Panuku's great work isn't in one silo? And the presentation did cover a couple of things, but I didn't really get a sense of kind of a real shared commitment and working together across council. Kia ora.
Well, if I can talk to just, I guess, the climate change aspect. So we have a number of, I guess, vehicles for that. So we've got a working group that helped develop Te Taruki a Tāwhiri, and so I sat on that. Colleagues from AT, there was water care, so there was CCO and council membership on that working group, so helping develop that strategy. So and then we've got I guess we've got a layer down from that that's not specifically just about the strategy, but or Auckland Climate Plan, but more about just general work programs. So there's a council and CCO sustainability managers kind of monthly forum that we have. So we do spend quite a lot of time staying across who's doing what and sharing best practice. And if somebody's looking at something or other, then we all kind of share that information. So just in terms of my particular role, I'm involved with both of those. I think across the organisation there is a lot of projects that we do collaborate with council and AT for sure on, and I did definitely, touched on a couple of those. And I think, I can't talk to all the different areas of the business, but
look, a couple of really good examples. There's a smaller one I mentioned yesterday, which is our work jointly with Auckland Transport to access the Wakakatahi Innovating Streets Fund,
nice.
Which we've done pretty well at. I think we've got 5 or 6 projects funded around the region, including Takapuna. And on a bigger scale, if you look at a central theme that runs through probably just about every one of our locations, we are trying to, working closely with AT, we are progressively going to be changing a big amount of what is currently at grade public car parking in centres into development sites. And that's a shared objective we have with Auckland Transport. Every one of the centres we're in, and Takapuna is a great example, is taking the online car parking sites that currently dominate a lot of these centres, because of what I said before, they're all designed in the 50s and 60s, and turning them into mixed development sites with a lot of residential. So that's a big piece of ongoing joint work between us and AT. Yeah, Park and Ride program was coming to committee soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that's the key thing. We need to be as bold as we need to be to ensure that you guys feel empowered to do the work you're doing, because I think we have, you know, like the selling of car parks or the changing of car parks, that can create some pain in the community. But I think I always think about the development afterwards. Would you tell a community with a great development, great open spaces, great connected community, would you rip that up and put a car park there? And everyone would say absolutely not. So I think, yeah, I just want to thank you. I think it's good for the committee to have that broad knowledge of what you are doing, and I know this is only a taste of that. So yeah, just thank you, and thank the whole team. That I know you both just representing the whole team who can't be here today, but thank you very much. And yeah, it's exciting the way we're going. So I'll move. If anyone.
Thank you for the invitation, Chair.
No worries.
Thank you.
Deputy Chair will second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
And those against? Thank you. Now we're just going to have a 5-minute break for grab a cup of tea, go to do what you need to do. So we'll be back at 11:48.